In the 24-25 Dominican Winter League, this particular at-bat went pretty viral, at least among baseball fans, as the clip got shared around a whole bunch of different social media platforms. If you didn't get to see it, here's some extra context. The man in the box is Junior Caminero, who you might know of as he was one of MLB's top prospects with the Rays and has played in a few dozen games in the big leagues already. He hasn't had a full season yet, but he's still only 21, and lately he's been lighting it up for his Winter League team, the Leones del Escogido. But this isn't just some ordinary Winter League game. It's Game 7 of the Dominican Professional Baseball Championship against the Tigres del Licey, two teams in Santo Domingo that share the same ballpark. The Tigres del Licey are the most decorated team in this league. They've won more titles than anyone, and beyond championship victories, they have the most titles among teams in the Caribbean Series, a tournament between all the best Winter League teams in Latin America. The Leones del Escogido are quite successful in their own right and are currently being managed by none other than Albert Pujols. So the stage has been set, and if you didn't know before, you certainly know now why this game was such a big deal. Caminero comes up to the plate with one out in the ninth and takes the first pitch for a ball. On the next pitch, he absolutely murders this baseball and sends it to deep center field. The distance posted on the wall says 411, and this thing clears it, hitting off the damn scoreboard. The ball also seemingly broke the scoreboard on impact. He goes nuts, his team goes nuts, and the energy in this place is just electric. The Leones would end up winning this game on an exciting final out, putting the cap on what was a ridiculously entertaining game overall. But this was still January 2025, and it had its viral moment, and the internet moved on from it expeditiously, as it does with all things. So with that, along with the title of the video, I'm sure you know there's more to this. The first thing I latched onto was this crazy home run trot, and it really is just spectacular. Right after he swings, Caminero knows it's gone. He's got the bat pointed in the air as he watches it fly. The camera cuts back after the ball is hit, and his helmet is just gone off his head already. The team flies out of the dugout elated, and he's high-fiving and fist-pumping on his way down to first. He is still absolutely pumped to the point where he stops at first base to cheer some more, and someone is nice enough to deliver his helmet back to him. He is jumping around the bases, still fist-pumping on his way to second. From my own rough calculation of the home run trot time, he steps on third at about 39 seconds. The average home run trot time in Major League Baseball is around 22 to 23 seconds, so we're already way past that. He is still hyped on his way to third as he stops at the base, embraces his third base coach, and finally slowly walks home, throws the helmet for the second time, and steps on the plate, all in 55 seconds. That is exactly why we're here, that glorious home run trot. When it comes to completely uninterrupted home run trots, that is by far the longest I have ever seen. And it had me thinking, in Major League Baseball, who are some of the outliers when it comes to trotting around the bases? You know, who are the slowest trotters? Who are the fastest ones? What was the single slowest trot of 2024? And so on. But I also want to see if there's any true cause or correlation with slow trotting. Is it just completely random? Does the player's speed have anything to do with it? Or is it all just celebrations, bat flips, and pimp jobs that slow the average down? If discussing the intricacies of home run trots doesn't prove that I came up with this in the offseason, I'm not sure what does. So let's do a little overview. Home run trot tracking is not a highly practiced thing from many MLB data resources, but Baseball Savant does provide a little. For players with at least 10 home runs in 2024, these were, on average, the top 10 slowest home run trotters in Major League Baseball. Only Marcell Ozuna could surpass the 30-second mark on average, with 3 Rays players in a row coming in right after him. Those 3 are Randy Arozarena, Yandy Díaz, and Jose Siri. Not sure what the MO was in Tampa that season, but maybe it rubbed off on Junior Caminero. I'm going to talk about everyone in the top 10, but I first want to highlight Jose Siri. One of the first things I thought about when trying to find the secret behind the slow trot is I do think there might be a general correlation between naturally slow players and average trot time. If we expand a little bit beyond the top 10 and into the top 20, not a lot of these guys are your typical speedsters. Marcell Ozuna, Yandy Díaz, Manny Machado, Machado, Alex Verdugo, Anthony Santander, Vladimir Guerrero Jr, Josh Naylor, Salvador Perez, Yordan Alvarez, Juan Soto, Wilson Contreras, Jesus Sanchez, Jerickson Profar, Justin Turner. That's 14 of the top 20 guys that have below average sprint speeds. As for the rest of the guys here, most of them aren't remarkably fast either, despite being above average, except Elly De La Cruz and Jose Siri, two of the fastest players in the league with very high percentiles in StatCast sprint speed. De La Cruz ranked 3rd overall in 2024 with 30 feet per second, and Siri ranked 8th overall with 29.9 feet per second. So undisputably some of the fastest guys in the league. I think sprint speed is going to be a factor in trot times, but it's not perfectly correlated. Comparing an average trot time with sprint speed doesn't take into account agency. You know, the ability to just choose. A fast player can just choose to take their trot as slow as they want. They're not constantly moving at a consistent speed like they're a programmed robot. The case where I think sprint speed is relevant to a home run trot is whether or not the player thinks the ball is gone off the bat. For example, if the batter isn't sure if the ball they just hit is going over the wall, they'll likely break out of the box into a sprint toward first instead of admiring their home run. The first 90 feet a fast player has to cover will more than likely be quicker than a slow player. So what else could be part of it? Well, pimp jobs are the first thing that comes to mind. Players who are more likely to admire and celebrate their home runs are likely going to take a bit of time to round the bases. At least I assume that would be the case. Now, whether a home run was pimped or not is subjective, so you're just going to have to go with my word here, but I tried to determine it based on a few things. If it was a clear bat flip, I automatically take that as a pimp job. For others that had more ambiguous bat drops, I tried to see if it really looked like they admired the home run either by standing at home plate for an extended period of time or watching the home run while slowly walking to first. To truly see what makes or breaks a slow trot, I timed every individual home run from the top 10 slowest home run trotters. I'm timing it manually because I cannot for the life of me find data for individual home run trot times from any season, even though obviously StatCast tracks it because they have the averages here. Either it's not available to the public or I'm an idiot, but I searched for a while and I just couldn't find it. I've done just as dumb things for these videos, so we can just add this one to the list. But I don't think it's all bad. When watching all the home runs, you really get to see the smaller details of the trot. Real quick, I want to mention that the results of my average trot time ended up slightly different from StatCast, likely from user error since I'm doing it manually, but it was usually by just tenths of a second and the rankings hardly changed from it. So let's dive into it. Starting with the slowest trotter of them all, Marcell Ozuna. I want to start with him because after watching all of these, he really gives us that initial look into every nuance involved in creating a slow home run trot. His fastest trot was 25.7 seconds, still slower than a majority of players on average, and his slowest was 33.9. The slowest trot was actually against one of his former teams, the St. Louis Cardinals. Maybe there was prior beef there to influence that. Probably not. Let's start off with the pimp jobs though. Ozuna doesn't do crazy bat flips or anything, but what he does do is slow. Ozuna will often pause in place to admire the home run and then start to jog. It's kind of random, and it got to the point where I couldn't even tell if some of them would even be called a pimp job by today's standards. But overall, I had him pimping 23 out of his 39 home runs, which is a pretty fair amount. There are guys in the top 10 who did it more often, but plenty of others who didn't do it nearly as much. If we were to take the average trot time of those non-pimped homers into their own equation, it would result in his trot time being about 28.3 seconds, while the rest of his home runs end up being 30.8 seconds. That's a 2.5 second difference depending on whether Ozuna pimped a home run or not. Pimping a home run slows things down for sure, but it doesn't answer everything. Even if we were to assume that Ozuna didn't pimp any of his home runs, 28.3 seconds is still slower than almost the entire league. I said that Ozuna encompasses everything it takes to be a slow trotter, so what else is causing it? Well, the first thing is Ozuna is one of the slowest runners in the league, so in situations where he does feel the need to run the bases because he's not sure if the ball is going over the fence, he's not covering as much ground as a faster runner. The next is the stutter step at third. Now this has a lot of variations, but I wasn't sure what else to call it. If you haven't seen this, it's not super common, but some players do it. In Ozuna's case, he does this little stutter step going to third base that slows him down a little bit. He also does the same thing when rounding second as well, which is the first time I've seen anyone do it around that base. The last thing that slows down Ozuna's trots is the celebration with his third base coach. Almost every player in baseball has one of these. Most of the time, it could be just a high five, while other players have more unique or personalized celebrations. For Ozuna, right after he steps on third and begins jogging home, he and his third base coach always mirror the same move, a Euro step into a layup. It's one of the more unique ones, and it also definitely slows things down. Side note, I love that third base coaches get implemented into celebrations. Like, hell yeah, man. You gotta remember and execute each player's unique celebration. That's just part of the job. Overall, these things don't seem like a lot individually, but seconds add up, and Ozuna is the only player in the top 10 that checks pretty much all the boxes. He pimps his home runs often, leaves the box slowly, has different stutter steps around the bases, has a slow third base coach celebration, and even if he doesn't pimp a home run, he's not a fast runner, so he doesn't boost the average trot time all that much. It's a perfect storm to be the slowest trotter like no one ever was. The second slowest trotter in 2024 was Yandy Arozarena, who averaged 29.7 seconds according to StatCast and 29.5 seconds according to my timing. Arozarena's slowest trot of 2024 was 33.5 seconds, and his fastest was 24.1. An interesting thing about Yandy is when I watch his home run trots, he looks like he's intentionally jogging quite a bit slower than he could, while Ozuna, on the other hand, that just looks like how he normally jogs. When it comes to pimp jobs, I had Yandy pimping 9 out of his 20 home runs. That results in 45% of the time, just under Ozuna's mark of 59%. His non-pimped home run trots ended up taking around 27.6 seconds on average, while his pimped home runs took 31.7 seconds on average. That's 4 seconds longer when he pimps a home run. Another thing I noticed from Yandy's home runs that is particularly slow is his celebration with his third base coach. As Arozarena approaches third base, he often does this thing where he jumps on the base, stops, and crosses his arms before trotting home. I like this one partly because I love the whole arms cross thing that Yandy does every chance he gets. However, at one point in the season, he stopped doing that celebration, and it was when he was traded to the Mariners. I don't know if he just wanted to switch things up with a new team or something else was involved, but once he joined Seattle, he began crossing his arms and running past third as opposed to stopping on the base. Other than that, there wasn't anything else to note from Arozarena, so let's move on. Yandy Díaz is the next player on this list, coming in with a 29.1 second trot time. Díaz had easily the biggest difference in trot time between StatCast and my own, with mine coming in 0.6 seconds faster at 28.5. That would actually put him at 4th behind Jose Siri, but I'm going to stick to the original rankings and talk about Siri after Díaz. Díaz also might be the most unique out of all the hitters we'll cover, and that's because I truly could not confidently say he pimped a single home run. Sure, he's pretty slow to come out of the box sometimes, and he throws the bat almost like it's a bat flip, but I wouldn't classify that as a pimp job. He does that every time. As I said, pimp jobs aren't everything, but we saw with Ozuna and Arozarena that they did have a tremendous impact on their slowest home run trots. That's something that Yandy just does differently, and something else that he did differently was his celebration with his third base coach. Sometimes it didn't seem like it affected his trot at all, and other times he slowed down and almost stopped at third to do it. There really wasn't any consistency there, and therefore it makes some trots slower by just a small margin. Regardless, I think his biggest contributor is his slow walk to home plate. When Díaz is about a quarter of the way between third and home, he stops jogging and starts walking toward the plate instead. I never really saw any other players do this as often and consistently as Díaz did, and it really slowed him down. Díaz is easily the weirdest ranking on this list, with a complete lack of pimp jobs, inconsistent home run trots, and yet there's only 2 players in the league that were slower than him. With the 29-second average trot time, Jose Siri was the 4th slowest trotter in MLB in 2024. I said earlier I had a lot of interest in his home run trots because his incredible speed should theoretically make him a faster trotter, but as I watched his home runs, it became increasingly evident to me why that doesn't apply to Jose Siri. I was very aware of Siri being a guy who likes to pimp home runs, so it makes a lot of sense that I only came out with 3 of them not being pimped. It's a very small sample, but of those 3 home runs, his average trot time was 24.5 seconds, significantly faster and much more in line with the rest of the league. With Siri being arguably the most flashy player on this list, every single home run was different from the last. That made timing each of them the most fun out of any of these players because I never knew what to expect. One second he would do a big bat drop with a casual stroll to first, and the next he'd be clapping at home plate and pounding his chest because he tied the game in the 9th. Siri was also a complete wild card around the bases. If we take a look at my data collection for Siri's home run trots, he would sometimes have a slow celebration at third and then wouldn't, and then back to it being slow and then not. That very likely affected his overall average. Before we move on, I do want to take a deeper look into his slowest home run trot. It was his 13th home run of the season at Yankee Stadium on July 21st. It was the top of the 7th, and the Rays were already up 3-0 on the Yankees. Siri sits on a slider by Jake Cousins and sends it to right center field for a 2-run home run. Remember how I said it clearly looked like Randy Arozarena was intentionally jogging slower than he could when he rounds the bases? Well, Jose Siri's might be even more obvious. This home run trot clocked in at 32.5 seconds, which is definitely slow, but I wouldn't say it's out of the ordinary for Siri. What was out of the ordinary is how the Yankees responded to this. All's fair in love and home run trots. If you can dish it, you gotta be prepared to take it, or at least your pitcher has to take it, I guess. In the bottom of that same inning, Aaron Judge came up and blasted a 444-foot home run to the left field bleachers. Now, Judge had a monumental 61 bombs in 2024 when you count both the regular season and the postseason, and according to StatCast, his home run trots were 23.9 seconds on average. That's pretty typical for an MLB player. This home run in particular, though, led to Judge taking just over 30 seconds to round the bases, exactly 7 seconds longer than his trots normally take. You know, maybe it was a coincidence. It was an abnormally slow home run trot for Judge that also happened just a half inning after Siri's slowest trot of the year. You never know. But there was no benefit of the doubt the next day. In the next game of the series, Juan Soto stepped into the box in the 7th inning again, with the Yankees having a 5-1 lead this time. He sends a deep shot down the right field line for a home run. For the trot times, I normally try to keep in mind home runs where the batter is trying to see whether it's fair or foul, but this one is kind of an exception because, unlike Judge, Soto usually takes his time rounding the bases. He just barely didn't make the top 10 in 2024 with his average trot time being 27.4 seconds. But even for Soto, this was a slow home run trot. This home run trot ended up taking Soto 37 seconds to round the bases. At the time, it was reported as the slowest home run trot of 2024. So Siri likely rubbed Judge, Soto, and the whole Yankees team the wrong way, being the catalyst of an all-time slow trot-off. The two teams didn't face each other in a series again this season, but Siri deserves some props for being such a notorious slow trotter that he motivated other players to do the same. Next up is Manny Machado, whose average trot time was 28.4 seconds, and he's one of the few that I ended up timing exactly the same as StatCast. Machado had 30 round trips under his belt, including the playoffs in 2024, and I had him pimping 20 of them. It's the second highest percentage of pimped home runs after Siri. Machado didn't seem to be slowed down by any stutter steps or third base coach celebrations. His quickest home run trot was just 23.5 seconds, while his slowest was a whopping 34. That is the slowest trot we've seen so far, not counting Soto's. As it happens, his second and third slowest trots were the 2 home runs he hit before that. His 25th and 26th home runs of the season made Padres history. He tied the Padres all-time home run record with his 25th and became the sole leader with his 26th. We don't know for sure, but it's possible he enjoyed those a little more than the rest and reflected that with his home run trots. But not quite better than his 27th home run trot. This trot is after a 2-run game-tying homer that Manny just pimps all the way down the first baseline. You could say this is just Manny being Manny, but there was actually a little extra fuel behind the fire here. Astros starter Hunter Brown begins this at-bat with a ball, then another ball with Tatis stealing second, and finally a third ball. Fairly uncompetitive pitches, and the 3-0 pitch wasn't much better, and Manny knew that. He tosses his bat away and begins walking toward first as home plate umpire Brendan Miller calls it a strike. Manny makes it obvious he's unpleased, but settles in the box for the 3-1 pitch. Machado takes the pitch once again, throws his bat, and begins to walk to first while Brendan Miller calls it a strike. Although that pitch was pretty close and could have easily been called either way, he's already infuriated as this at-bat should have been over earlier than this. After fouling off the first 3-2 pitch, he then sits on a curveball and launches it to left center field. Of course, hitting a game-tying home run is going to fire up a guy plenty, but the home plate umpire was likely the precursor to that lengthy 34-second home run trot. Our next hitter is Alex Verdugo with 14 home runs in the year, and similar to Jose Siri, he didn't hit a lot of them, but he certainly pimped them. Some were hard to tell with a lack of broadcast footage, so those weren't counted as pimp jobs, but I still ended up with 9 pimped out of his 14 home runs in 2024. He is also similar to Siri in that his celebration with his third base coach often varied. Sometimes it was slow and impeded his trot, other times it didn't really have an effect. Verdugo isn't naturally a fast runner, but I think he chooses to jog around the bases slower than he can, akin to Arozarena and Siri. Verdugo's quickest and slowest trots in 2024 came back-to-back with his 9th and 10th home runs of the year. They're easily the most interesting thing here because there's a little bit of history behind them. Both those home runs came against the Boston Red Sox, Verdugo's former team. Here's a quick recap of what led up to this. Verdugo has a very intriguing trade history, being front and center of the trade package the Dodgers sent to get Mookie Betts from the Red Sox. Naturally, it was unreasonable to think he'd be the direct replacement for a future Hall of Famer, and he wasn't bad per se, but he still didn't get anywhere close to those monumental expectations. Boston ended up trading him in his last year before free agency to their longtime rivals, the New York Yankees. Being traded away, especially in division, definitely puts a chip on someone's shoulder, but there may have been even more tension between Verdugo and the Red Sox. Boston's manager, Alex Cora, benched Verdugo a few times in the 2023 season for lacking hustle on the bases and also for being late to the ballpark before a game one time. There's no way we could know everything that went down, but based on what we do know, I can't particularly blame Cora for those decisions. But maybe Verdugo took issue with him making that information public, there's that too. Well, now in Verdugo's return to Fenway on June 14th, 2024, he wore his heart on his sleeve when he sent a ball to straightaway center field for a home run. This goes for most ballparks, but unless you really tattooed a ball to center field in Fenway, you're probably going to need to break out in a sprint to make sure you at least get a double or even a triple if it bounces off the wall. Verdugo does begin to hustle right out of the box, but the ball just gets over the wall. Verdugo is immediately absolutely ecstatic, screaming and flexing as he runs around the bases. He cannot contain his excitement, and it results in his fastest home run trot of 2024 at 22.8 seconds. Flash forward to July 6th in New York, Verdugo has not hit a homer since that game in Fenway, but against Josh Winkowski, he hits a middle sinker to center field for a game-tying 2-run homer. This time though, Verdugo was much more composed and made sure he took his time around the bases. He went from a 22.8 second trot, the fastest out of anyone in the top 10, right to a 31.9 second trot. Later in that game, Rafael Devers ended up hitting a deep home run against Garrett Cole to take back the lead for the Sox, and it got brought into question whether his pimp job and celebration were in response to Verdugo. But his trot time wasn't really out of the ordinary, and he claims that the gesture he made was to his bullpen, which wouldn't be shocking as it's pretty common for players to do that when rounding the bases. What's funny though is I watched all of Devers' home runs because of this, and he only ever made that gesture one other time, and it was a month after this. I don't think he was lying, but at the same time, even if he was, like I said earlier, if you dish it, you gotta be able to take it. Alex Cora didn't really seem to care though, and as far as I know, there wasn't much tension after that. Coming in at 7th, we have Anthony Santander, who hit the most home runs out of anyone in the top 10 with 44. He popped off in 2024, and according to StatCast, Santander had an average trot time of 28.1 seconds, and I had the same result as well. Santander was probably the most difficult one for me to determine pimp jobs for. There were a lot of homers to go through, and with footage often cutting away from the start of his trot, there were a lot of ones that I wasn't sure about, but I still stood by the idea that if I can't tell, then I'm not going to jot it down as a pimp job. Overall, I had him pimping only 7 of his 44 home runs, which would be our lowest percentage if it weren't for the fact that Yandy Díaz had 0%. I think the reasons behind Santander's slow trots are pretty simple. There was no stutter step at third or a celebration with a coach that made it slow. I just think he simply is a slower guy, and he doesn't jump out of the box on contact. So it's different than someone who admires their home runs, but ultimately this constant state of slow moving out of the box creates the same effect. Santander's quickest home run trot was 24.8 seconds, and his slowest was an incredible 39.3 seconds. I'm not sure if it's the slowest of 2024 since I don't have access to that data, but the 37-second home run trot by Soto that we talked about earlier was claimed to be the slowest of the year when it happened that July. Santander's home run was 2 months later on September 19th. So what do we know? Well, we know this is the slowest trot among players in the top 10, and including Soto just out of the top 10, and I would not be surprised at all if it's the slowest trot of 2024. One of the big reasons as to why this was such a lengthy home run trot is because it was a walk-off. With 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th of a 3-3 game, Santander swung big at a slider in the zone and sent it to right field. This ball was hit a mile into the air, and it had the height for sure, so the only question left was whether or not it would be caught and send the game to extras. The ball eventually came down just beyond the fence, and Santander took his sweet time around the bases before joining his team at home plate. He was already primed to not run out of the box, combined with the towering shot that this home run was, and it being a walk-off, led to potentially the slowest trot of 2024. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is our next player, and he had the 8th slowest average trot time in 2024. That trot time was 27.9 seconds, but I had him just lower at 27.7. Right out of the gate, Vladdy didn't have as many pimp jobs as I was expecting, and I had him pimping just 10 of his 30 home runs. Vlad is also the first player we've talked about since Marcell Ozuna that actually does the stutter step while rounding the bases, so I don't look like a psycho for mentioning it in Ozuna's section just for it to never come up again. But Guerrero's is a little different, as his is in the middle of second and third rather than right before the base as Ozuna's is. Also, instead of a stutter step, it's more like he stops, steps back, and then jumps before moving forward again. I'm not sure if there's significance behind it, but I am sure that it slows down his home run trots, even if it's just a little. Guerrero's fastest home run trot of 2024 was 24 seconds, and his slowest was just over 33. That slowest home run trot came against the Yankees at home, where the Jays were trailing by 3 in the bottom of the 7th inning. Vladdy sends a fastball way up in the air the other way, causing him to slowly walk to first and admire it. Like Santander's, this one took some time to get out. Once he sees it's over the wall, he turns around and zips his bat towards his dugout in excitement. He may have had fewer pimp jobs than I was expecting, but the ones that were there were pretty electric. Just behind Guerrero with an average trot time of 27.8 seconds is Josh Naylor. If you want to find a guy with some of the most insane and ridiculous pimp jobs, Josh Naylor is your guy, so it's not surprising he made this top 10. Out of his 31 home runs in 2024, I had him for sure pimping 14 of them. If we look at the trot time for only his pimped home runs, it goes up to 29.1 seconds, and for his non-pimped homers, it's 26.2 seconds, about a 3-second gap. Naylor's slowest trot of 2024 was just over 31 seconds, which doesn't seem extraordinary compared to the other guys on this list, and it isn't, as it's the fastest trot out of each player's slowest trots. if that makes sense. That home run trot was mainly slow because Naylor ripped a ball down the right field line and stood at the plate for a while watching it. Was he trying to see if it would go foul, or was he trying to just pimp the homer? Not really sure, but I think similar to Soto's 37-second home run trot, they both used that opportunity to pimp the home run and see if it was foul. That's pimp job fundamentals right there. Naylor, of course, had some crazy pimp jobs, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll automatically make it a slow trot. For example, in Naylor's 6th home run of the 2024 season, after he smashed the ball to right center field, he began making his way toward first and impulsively slammed his bat against his own forehead, screamed, and threw the bat on the ground. Now, is that the craziest celebration I've ever seen? Maybe, but it also might be the most passionate thing I've seen a player do on a baseball field at the same time. He did it because he liked it. But the takeaway here is that this trot was just over 26 seconds, meaning that a pimp job doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be slow. Finally, the last player we'll be looking at is Royals veteran Salvador Perez. Perez is the first and only catcher in the top 10, with an average trot time of 27.5 seconds from StatCast and 27.2 seconds from my own. Salvador Perez is one of the league's slowest players, and I think it impacts his home run trots more than anyone else on this list. I often mention how I can tell that certain guys are intentionally jogging slowly. Salvador Perez is one of those guys who just looks like he's jogging the way he normally does. I bring this up because there's not much behind Salvy's slow trots. He doesn't pimp many home runs, as I've got just 5 out of his 27 homers being pimped, and he doesn't have a slow third base coach celebration or anything like that. Also, for the first time out of any of the players in the top 10, I had to remove a home run from the list. This was because only Salvy had a home run that wasn't originally called one on the field. It was originally just a double and then needed to be reviewed and confirmed as a home run. Once it was verified as a home run minutes later, it was pretty much impossible to time his trot after that. This home run had some significance behind it, as it was Salvy's 250th of his career. It also wasn't going to be a home run until Brandon Nimmo provided a bit of an assist. Anyways, with pretty much nothing to go off of here except the fact that Salvy is one of the slowest players in the league, can that really carry his slow trots that much? Well, I believe it does partly answer it, but another part is that when he does hit home runs, even though he might not be pimping them, he takes his time to get to first. Salvy usually will just hit an absolute mammoth home run, take a look at it for a moment, and begin walking to first, dropping his bat down the same way almost every time. It's really similar to Santander and Díaz. The three of them show it doesn't take much beyond patiently leaving the box and a brisk jog around the bases to be one of the slowest trotters in the league. Sometimes it's as simple and kind of boring as that. So what was really the point of all of this? There are a lot of factors, and there might not be a perfect science to the home run trot. You likely could have told me that before the video in a very snarky way, but the goal wasn't solely to find an end-all be-all answer to the slow trot. Having no answer is sometimes the answer. If I were to choose, I think the biggest factor in the slow trot is who's willing to begin their trot immediately and who isn't. That's what was most apparent when I watched the fastest home run trotters. If we look at the same rankings, minimum of 10 home runs, fastest average trot time, the top 10 looks like this. Now, some of these guys are pretty fast. Joey Ortiz, Dalton Varsho, Luke Raley, Harrison Bader, but honestly, nobody is as fast as someone like Jose Siri. I think there are levels to these things. Being slow or fast, having crazy pimp jobs, or just keeping your head down, having a stutter step or a third base coach celebration, these are all things that can separate the slowest trotters from each other, but they don't define the slow trot. The fast trotters were always just immediately running to first, and that's what I think makes the biggest impact. It applies to both pimp jobs and non-pimp jobs. The biggest chunk of time saved in a home run trot is those first 90 feet. So I think that's the true X factor of the slow trot if I had to choose one. One last thing before I end this one off. I found out through the article talking about Soto's 37-second home run trot that home run trot data may be found through MLB's research tool. Now, this is something you have to sign up for with like a company, and I have no idea if this is something MLB would even approve of me having access to, as my credentials are making videos. And I never even tried to sign up for it because if it's not public information that anybody can find, it would feel weird for me to talk about something you all can't even access yourselves. Also, it lets my brain justify spending a humiliating amount of hours timing and analyzing 266 different home run trots, and that's only counting the ones from the top 10. Thanks for watching.